Judi Levine's directly the producer of the film. She happens to be my wife. I'm not sure which title is the more intimidating. I'm delighted to be here and participate in any questions or issues that you want to bring up. Any trick questions, I'll pass on to her.
The article that the film is based off of, when you first read that article, what was so intriguing about the article that you wanted to make a movie about?
I don't think it was a question of being intriguing. I think it just blew me away emotionally. And that's not something that happens very often to an old geezer like me. I think it was definitely a gut feeling that if only I could do on film what he'd done in his own simple way as a writer, that then I could do something meaningful. So it was simple as that.
Thank you.
I know that Cheryl was one of the advisors on the film. What was that? Was she on set a lot of the time, or was she by the writing of it?
She came down and joined us on set on a couple of occasions, but never when Helen was playing her. I think there was this tacit understanding. We never talked about it, but she never sought to impose herself when things were at their most delicate. But she was pretty much one of the family when we started working on the film, and I know that meeting her in the first instance completely turned my head from writing a biopic to writing something which I saw essentially as a relationship movie, as a journey for two rather than a journey for one. But Cheryl was a very, very essential part of the whole thing, and the word consultant doesn't quite do it.
Speak up if you can so everybody can hear.
How accurately were the love scenes depicted?
The love scenes?
Yeah, the therapy sessions.
It's a hard one for me to answer, but as accurately as I could, and pretty much followed what Mark had written about them. In terms of, I'm pretty sure that the first scene, when there's the whole awkwardness of getting them undressed, is probably the most accurate in terms of pretty much following line for line what Mark had written. So I'd like to think that probably their sessions together are the most accurate representation of the relationship. Oh, sorry.
Tell us about working with the actors.
The most critical part of working with actors is casting, making the decision who to offer the part to. You get that wrong and you're really in deep trouble. You get it right and the director's job from there on is pretty much not to get in the way. That's a very broad kind of definition, but working with the actors was probably a process that was more meaningful before the shoot than during the shoot. That was when we had time to be together, to study the text as closely as we could, to argue out our different points of view. By the time we would start shooting, there'd be very little apparent work between us. I would be there as a watchful eye rather than a manipulator. I'm always very amused. Could you hold this for a moment? In a picture, you see Roman Polanski doing that in front of the actors. It's never happened in my experience. I really don't want to be noticed when they're actually doing it. And my sense of working with the actors, as I say, is all in the preparation. And when they're at their most sensitive, to stay out of their faces is my approach. But it's not always the same. Every actor you work with differently. There's no uniform approach. I suppose the actor that I worked with the most, just as a matter of interest, was the actor who played Vera, Moon Bloodgood. most of her roles hitherto have been, you know, the sexy action hero type roles. And I think she was not used to a role where she really, the best thing to do was to do very little. And I found it very gratifying working with her to sort of help her adapt to a totally different role from what she had previously done. In terms of Bill Macy, working with him, if he asked me for direction, I'd just say, well, please nod your head while I'm talking to you, and it'll make me look good in front of the crew. So I'd say it's very different with everyone.
Talk a little bit about the role of religion in the film, both the Catholicism and the
All right, well, I'm not the best person to talk about religion. I'm sort of a fundamentalist atheist when it comes down to it. And again, my blueprint was what was the reality. Mark was definitely a very devout Catholic, and I thought that, you know, his life was a paradoxical one in that he was both thanking and blaming his creator. And that sort of resonated, I think, through his poetry and his other writings. And I really wanted to just try and recreate his relationship with God and his faith as faithfully as I could. There was actually a priest in his life who told him, you know, Jesus was a bit of a rebel, and he'll let you get away with this. I mean, that was based on the counsel of a real character. And so too was the conversion, you know, Cheryl Cohen Reid's conversion. It was part of her story. And I guess in the writing, it wasn't so much a question of how does this fit? How does the religion and the sex, how do they fit together? It was just a fact of both their lives that it was there, and I felt it was my responsibility to weave it together without trying to send a message. It was just part of the part of the palette that was given.
Hi, I love the film. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It's really fantastic. I'm curious, what was the most rewarding part about making this film or telling this story for you personally?
Well, some people would say the $6 million that Fox Searchlight had just thrown at us. However, if I was to think of one really gratifying moment, it's not a typical moment. The cameraman, Jeffrey Simpson, is an old friend of ours. We worked with him 30 years ago, and he came from Australia to do this film for us without a penny. He didn't pay him a penny, and he didn't want any money, and he had an incredible workload because we were working with a very young and inexperienced crew, and he was running around doing the work of several people. After a few days, I felt really anxious about it, and felt that I was imposing on the generosity of a wonderful man. And I asked him, Jeff, are you managing this all right? Are you at least enjoying it a bit? And he came out with this huge smile and said, I'm having a fantastic time. And this is a man who shot more films than I've had hot breakfast. And that, in a way, was one of the most gratifying moments. If this guy was having a fantastic time shooting my film, then I thought, okay, I'm making the right movie.
I'm curious as to the origin of Cheryl's mikvah scene. Was that from her input? Was that from Mark's writing, or was it from another origin?
No, that was from her account. I mean, that's one of the things I found fascinating about Cheryl. She was prepared pretty much to embrace every experience of life that came along. Catholicism, atheism, Judaism, whatever. Let's bring it on. Certainly, you know, she went through that exact ritual, and I felt it was a good metaphor without being too symbolic for finding something in yourself, and dramatically just a useful connection from what the mikveh lady was saying, you know, this is your body, to a scene which did actually occur between Cheryl and Mark, where she brought along a mirror to show him he didn't look that bad after all. And originally there was actually a line I had in voiceover, hey, that's not too bad, but I cut it because it was in his face. Again, that was a piece of reality which I was able to use as an important symbolic moment. Yes.
Did you have any interaction with the actual father? And I also thought that it was interesting, Mark talking about his sexual experiences and the father obviously living precariously through that.
What is it about the connection between them that you were asking? I'm sorry for not to hear.
Did you have any interaction with the actual father?
The actual priest?
Yes.
No, I didn't. I really didn't think I'd get a lot of cooperation from the Catholic Church if I said and I have a feeling that in the totality of the relationship, it was probably more than one priest that he related to. But so in a sense, the overall character is a construct based on really, well, you know, it was one of those parts that what you ended up with was who you cast. It was a perfect example of casting defining the role. And Bill Macy really did help define that role and probably contributed enormously to the innate humor of that character. I know that in the scene where, at the last scene together where he says, okay, I've got this message, sorry to give you, love is a journey. And Mark says, oh, I like it already. And then he says, oh, well, that's it, that's all I've got. Well, that was Bill's addition to it. You know, I have to give him credit for that, and also for the incredible nuance he brought to the character. I mean, at one level, the character was a kind of cipher because it was there to express Mark's inner voice, but he turned it into a character. That's one of the things that kind of happens organically in a shoot. You don't really plan for it. Is that a useful answer?